In this last video, I'm going to explore the outputs in civil site design. So I'll output some cross sections, long sections. We'll talk about what CAD Output's used for. We'll output some Setout Points, volumes. But to get started, I wanted to talk about the toggle display command. Now, as we're working on our design using civil site design, you will see line work appear, perhaps representing the contours or the line work for our strings or road. Now, this line work is not necessarily CAD polylines. In fact, it isn't. We display it as a block reference, and even then it's not really a block reference. But what you need to know is that this is sort of temporary. In fact, if you were to give this drawing to someone who didn't have civil site design, they wouldn't be able to see this line work. So if I click on the toggle display command, first thing I want to do is show you how we can control the display of this line work, and after that I want to show you how you can actually output it to CAD elements or CAD objects so that you can archive the drawing and someone who opens up the drawing will actually see it. So toggle display, there are three tabs. The first one allows us to toggle the display of surfaces. Now I have one surface called total model, which was created when I ran the auto model command. If I wanted to display the mesh for this surface, I tick on mesh, and then I can see the triangulation. We can see extra triangulation where there are vertical curves, and we can also see the mesh refinement at the intersection. So I'll turn the mesh off. We can also toggle the display of the contours and set their interval as well. I've just turned off the contours, and perhaps we want to do that just to clean up the drawing a little bit. I'll turn them back on. Now, if I click on models and line work, I have one model, as I mentioned, produced by Auto Model. If I tick off displayed, then so let's turn off the mesh. If I tick off displayed, then I don't see the line work for that particular model. The other important thing to mention here is the auto rebuild checkbox. What that means is that every time I make a change in the vertical grading editor, this model, being our primary model, will automatically update. Now you might work on a project with multiple models, and it might not be necessary to update all of them when you perform an edit. So commonly you will come in here and adjust which model you want to auto rebuild. The final tab is the ability to turn on the sample lines for a string, and this is where you can see how the software has calculated the string and what sections are being used for the calculations. Now, on a lot of modern computers, you could probably get away with sampling at quite tight intervals. In a lot of jobs, I will sample at 1 meter. But with this default sampling, I think I created the string at 10 meter intervals, but the software will add in extra sections for you, perhaps at the start and end at curves, at the TPs of the curve returns, etc. So there's a few other points where the software will add in extra sections to, I guess, ensure your string's being calculated accurately. So toggle display is used just to turn on and off the display of the line work and the surface data, but the key thing to remember is it's not real CAD entities. If I want to turn this data into real CAD entities, then I use the CAD Output command. And this allows me to, say for example, for the surfaces, I can output the contours as real 2D polylines or the triangles as 3D faces, and I can output the line work as either 2D polylines or 3D polylines. In regards to the line work, there is some extra level of customization you can go to. So when you output 2D or 3D polylines, you can actually pick and choose what layer they use to adopt the style, and then a naming style which determines how the layer will be named when the line work is created. Okay, and we talk about three types of line work: the auto, which is the automatic stuff that I mentioned, and then the setup for 2D and 3D polylines. So if I was to click OK, you probably won't notice anything different. However, if I go and click on, say, a contour, you can see it's an actual polyline now. If I click on this footpath line work, it's a polyline object. Okay. Now, if I click on the cleanup button, this button is used to remove CAD entities that Civil Site Design has produced. So if I click on cleanup, it would have removed those polylines that CAD Output had created. Now, one thing to point out, in CAD Output, there is a tick box called Dissociate Objects. And what that means is when the CAD entities are created, Civil Site Design will not be aware of them. It'll dissociate itself from knowing the origins of the object. And the reason we put this in is we had users who would output polylines and maybe offset them to create new objects. And when they ran cleanup, Civil Site Design would remove them. If you use dissociate, then the cleanup command won't work on polylines outputted. Also from here, you can output your surfaces to XML files. It's also worth noting that this surface model is a Civil Site Design surface model. So the Surface Manager is used to manage its display. And a lot of guys often like to use the Civil Site Design Surface Manager as a way of maybe doing some analysis, some slope shading, or turning on the slope arrows and that type of thing. However, you can also run the Civil 3D Surfaces command to export this surface as a Civil 3D surface. And the beauty of that is that you can add Civil 3D labels and use the Civil 3D surface analysis tools. So that covers CAD Output and Toggle Display, two very important commands, and also Cleanup. The next command I want to show is Volume. So this command will output sectional volume information. On the left lists all of my strings, whether they're road or curb strings, and you just select what string you want to output for. So section by section for road 1 here is showing me at every chainage what the cut, the fill is, pavement volume, and a cumulative total. Now there are some sections where the answer is 0, and that's because I have trimmed ticked on at intersections. So where we have intersections, it's the curb return that is used to calculate the volumes through those regions there. So with trim ticked on, we'd be overlapping if we were to calculate volumes on the road through there. So I can use subgrade by section to see how much subgrade is calculated between each section. If I click on material totals, it gives me a total of cut and fill, pavement, and a breakdown of the total materials. Okay. If I tick on all roads, then this is for the entire total model design, accounting for intersections, cul-de-sacs, or any other network strings that I might have used. Now these reports can be outputted as a table in model space, or I can also export it to Excel as well. Any of these tables can be exported to Excel. There are some settings, so under the calculation settings you can choose to calculate volumes between codes or between alignments. Some people like to omit batters from their volumes. And we can also calculate volumes against an alternate surface. Maybe you don't want to calculate the volumes against the default sampled surface. Other settings relate to customizing information that we're outputting and styling up the table that gets outputted to CAD. So you can leave this window open, perhaps on another screen, and the refresh button down the bottom will recalculate if design changes are made. So that's the volume report for sectional volume output, and you'll also be able to obtain material outputs from here as well. So the next thing I'm going to do is output a cross section. Cross sections are pretty straightforward. We just click on the cross sections command, click on the string we want to output, and the first option, or the first window that appears, allows us to specify what sections we want to output. Now, if I click on Edit Selected Sampled Sections List, this gives me a list of all the calculated sections for a string, where they come from, what type they are, and how they are used. And so, if you didn't want to output a section for a particular, you want to output a particular cross section, then you can simply go and tick it off, right? But I can see I have sections from my super elevation, my standard 10-meter sections as well, and perhaps start and end of curbs, curb returns also. Now, if I want to use that edited list, then I pick on Selected Sampled Sections. So when I do that, we enter preview mode, where I can see a preview of all of the cross sections. Now, also displayed is this cross section options window, and this is where we can customize the plot. I'm not going to go into all the setup here. You can do do a lot of things like displaying extra information. Maybe I want to show blocks, boundary, guideposts, that type of thing. Wide range of customization with cross-section plots. Another way of actually setting up what cross-sections you want outputted is via this new sections list setup. So this is new. This is another way of going in and setting up exactly what type of cross sections you want outputted, maybe accounting for geometry types, horizontal or vertical geometry types, etc. So I won't spend too much time on this, but if I wanted to plot these out to a drawing file, I can use plot to file. If I go plot to layout, then the software will generate paper space layout sheets for me. And you can go to the detail of even specifying what title block you want used. Okay. Now, long sections work in a very similar way. So I can edit the sample sections. Normally what I do here is I go straight to the load style button and I load in a standard output. So let's just go, I'll go to 50/50. So I guess the main setup for long sections happens in setup row data. This is where you can add other strings. Maybe I want to show the table drain string on the plot, add cut and fill depths, show volume information, even show pipes. Wide range of setup can happen in here. But once again, I'm not going to spend too much time. I'm just going to go plot to layout and produce the long sections here. Now, one thing that the software will do, which is pretty cool, is it will add a viewport displaying the plan. It'll automatically display it to correspond with the long section down the bottom. Okay. And yeah, I mean, I think it's a big time saver. So you can see how quickly it is to output long sections and cross sections. They are style based, so a lot of users will create their own styles over time. And as I said, there's a lot of flexibility in the customization of these plots. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is maybe we want to create some setout points. So there's actually a few ways to do this. I guess the common command is multi-setout. We do have another command called civil points. Civil points will output, I guess, an intelligent AutoCAD block that can dynamically reference a string. And the beauty of multi-setout is you can set out multiple strings all in the one interface. So I think what I'll do is I'll start off by showing you multi-setout, and we'll output the curve and channel points to output the curve and channel for this new curve we added in a previous video. So I click on multi-setout. You name the setout, so I'll just call it curve. And this interface appears. The first thing I do is go straight to load setout style, and I pick one of the standard styles. So I'm going to go for maybe Civil 3D Points centerline code. So from this first tab, I tell the software what objects I want to output and what code I want to set out. So I don't want to output the centerline code. I actually want to output the backer curve, and maybe I want to offset it a meter. So the next tab, point display output, allows me to customize the display of a point in the drawing. Maybe I just want a circle with the point number. Then there's the table output, which allows me to output a table with the set out information. And on styles and settings, two things happen here. One, I can tell the software to output Civil 3D points. Now, if you have Civil 3D, I tend to not use the point display, the CAD point display, rather the Civil 3D object itself. The labels in Civil 3D are far more powerful and will automatically scale on viewports and all that type of thing. So the other thing we can do in here is set a spacing style. So this is very similar to the sections list, where for a particular string I can say, well, create setout points 10 meters along the tangents and maybe at quarter points on the arcs. So what I'm going to do is go back to object and code selection. I'm going to select everything and turn the setout off, but for my new LEB, actually we'll go existing row crown because that's what I want to set out. There's a template on that string, then I want to set out a code on that template. So I'm going to edit that string and say I want to output 10 meter tangents at quarter points of the arcs and include that in my setout. So, and it'll output the left backer curve a meter back. So the other thing, just before we click on create setout, I can create a text file that could, or a CSV file that the surveyor can take. If I wanted the CAD table, I can output that, and if I wanted the CAD point, circle and number, I can output that, but I'm going to turn those off for this output. So I click on create setout, tells me it's going to create some Civil 3D points, okay, which it has done half a meter back from the backer curve. So I normally go and style these points. In fact, what I normally do is create a new point group called setout, and I override the style to maybe show so let's keep that standard, maybe a point number on a 45-degree angle. But the beauty of Civil 3D is you can go into a lot of detail on the styling, and I'm going to say, well, any point in this point group, override the style, and I'm going to include all points with a raw description of set asterisks. So all my setout points will be included in that. So you can see there the Setout point group is created with all those Setout points. They've now been styled, and if I wanted to, I could output a point table with all of those Setout points using the Civil 3D Setout table. So that's one way to do Setout. The other way, which I'll very quickly do, is using the new Civil Points. It's the Civil Site Design equivalent. And maybe I'll create some Setout points along the rural road for whatever reason. So this time I'm going to go points by reference, point code SO. I'm going to set out, let's pick a code for Setout. I'll go and output maybe the left edge of bitumen, and we'll go back 2 meters for whatever reason, and we'll grab the elevation of left edge bitumen. So here I'm just setting out what code I want to output, where I want it positioned. Okay, we can pick a style. Maybe once again I just want a point with a circle around it, and then I specify chainages. Now in this case I can use one of those chainage lists, which are very customizable. I can go in to edit a particular chainage list. This is the one where you can actually go to a lot of detail on what geometry points you want outputted, but I'll keep it simple for this example. So I click on Create Points. Okay, and now I've got Setout points for this rural road. And this is using the Civil Points tool. If I click on Point Groups, I can go to the Setout Point group, which will list all of those Setout points, and I can output those to a file or to a table in the drawing. Okay. Now if I do make a change to the alignment or the vertical information, by clicking on Update, it'll automatically update those points. Okay. So there's 2 ways to do Setout. So yeah, that covers off the final video. As I said, I wanted to cover cross sections, long section outputs, CAD output, talk about toggle display, volumes, and a couple of approaches to doing Setout.